Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Pentecost, and I'm with APA Virginia staff. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone we've opened registration for our annual conference, Mountains of Influence, at Wintergreen Resort on July 22nd through the 25th. You can register at apavirginia.com. And there are special rates for members. If you're a speaker, we have reduced rates for you. We have reduced rates for faculty and students, planning commissioners, all kinds of deals. So go ahead and get registered before June 30th to take advantage of early bird rates. And we've got some exciting things planned this year, like a reception at Devil's Backbone. You're not going to want to miss it. That it's going to be an add-on ticket for our registration this year. So for $10, we'll provide transportation up and down the mountain, a full dinner, and some other exciting things are in the works. So you will definitely want to be at Devil's Backbone Monday night of the conference. We hope to see you all there this year. And on our website, we have a draft schedule, information on mobile tours, plenary and keynote speakers, and all the other exciting things happening this year. So take a look at apavirginia.com and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, when we'll put out all of our information there as well. And for those of you who just signed on, thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Thanks to everyone who shares this with your colleagues and helps spread the word about our series. This is currently free and open to anyone. You don't have to be an APA Virginia member or a member at all. And we offer 1 CM credit for those of you who watch it live. We do post a recording to our YouTube page, so be on the lookout for that and our follow-up email with a link to register for next month's webinar on May 21st. We have Andrew Painter, a zoning attorney in Northern Virginia, presenting his lecture on the history of growth in Northern Virginia. You can also sign up for that at apavirginia.com. And I'm now going to hand this over to Darren Coffey with the Berkeley Group, our wonderful sponsor of this series. We are so thankful for their continued support and giving us opportunity to provide this for you all. So, Darren, I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. We are thrilled to be sponsors of this series. It's been very successful, and we're just proud to help propagate our industry and help with professional development. It's my great pleasure to be hosting this one and facilitating the discussion with Kim Lundgren. Basically, one of the things that has come about in our industry in the 21st century is the importance of a community telling their story. And we've talked with communities about you finding your Monticello, what makes you tick, what can you embrace, understanding who you are in order to move forward. Some of the other things in our industry that have been talked about a lot are sustainability and the importance of being a sustainable community, being a resilient community. And so all of those things kind of come together here. And Kim is the founder and chief executive officer of Kim Lundgren Associates. She has spent her last 16 years working with local governments around the country to implement sustainability programs focused on climate change. As an experienced facilitator and strategist, she promotes a comprehensive approach to sustainability planning that encourages deep stakeholder engagement and the tracking of key sustainability indicators. And that tracking is typically done through a community dashboard. And so there's your performance measure on how you're doing, and it varies according to your community. Kim is an accredited Envision sustainability professional and is also a member of the STAR Communities Technical Advisory Group, the American Planning Association, and the chair of the American Public Works Association Center for Sustainability. And with that, I will let Kim do what she does best and walk us through this very interesting storytelling presentation. Kim?
Thank you, Darren, and good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all enjoying a cloudy, rainy, chilly Monday in April. I'm really excited to be with you all here today. This is actually a presentation I've given at conferences, so I've mostly done it in person. So I'm going to work really hard to make this as interactive as possible over a webinar. But the idea here is we really just want to get you thinking about how you can get started right away. You don't have to hire a consultant. You don't have to buy a dashboard. You can do those things, but there's ways that you can get started today basically for free. And maybe working with some interns if you need a little help on that side. But so we're going to talk today about kind of how to inspire community action through storytelling. And so I think everybody's seeing my, okay, I'm not progressing. Are my slides moving for you guys? Oh, there we go. So for today's agenda, I want to give a little bit of an overview talking about the trends in local government, and we've seen a lot of shift. I actually worked in a local government. I was one of the early municipal sustainability directors in the country, and so started in 2001 and worked for several years, and a lot has changed even in the last 5 years as far as how we operate as local governments and what the expectations on us are. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those and how we can work within that framework to be successful. We'll touch base a little bit on why storytelling is important, how it impacts us, and then really the majority of this session we're going to focus on how you can use your data to tell your story. And so I would encourage everybody, if you do have like a pen and paper handy, we've got some little exercises that you can do. I'll kind of walk through some examples on the webinar, but you may want to just take some notes and think about what it means in your community with the questions we have there. So that might be one way we can be a bit interactive, and maybe some of you leave with you know, something you can move forward on right away. That would be a goal. I should have plenty of time left for questions and answers, so that if folks do have those, we can get them answered on the webinar. If need be, I can always, you can feel free to email me directly as well. Okay, so let's get started. Trends in local government. So I'm sure most of you either are in local government or work closely with local governments, and you know, there are growing pressures now and expectations for local governments, and one, of course, is around transparency. The idea that a local government needs to be transparent with its community. How are you spending our money? What are the priorities? Where is these activities? What are these going to lead to? How do they improve our community? These are all good things. Transparency is a very good thing. I think where local governments struggle is sometimes on how we execute it. And this is not for, you know, lack of wanting to do well. It's often that we didn't necessarily have all the systems and processes in place to make transparency as easy as possible in our current framework. And there's a lot of folks that are going to come at you and say, hey, you know, here are our new tools and this shiny new object over here. This is a great way to be transparent. You need to figure out what makes the most sense for your community. And so for a lot of folks, like we've seen, okay, you know, social media is one of those tools that's now in our toolbox. It's a great way to be transparent and let folks know what we're talking about. But, you know, how many of your communities have, every department has its own Facebook page or Twitter account? And who has time to keep those updated? One of the big things we know about social media is the challenge of keeping it updated. If you are not updating it, and certainly with social media, it really needs to be 2 to 3 times a day. Most of us in local government do not have those kinds of resources available that we can just have a social media person keeping everything pumped out. There are ways we can schedule things, but you know, every department having a Facebook page may not necessarily be the best way to execute on that level of transparency, particularly if you're a smaller community. But it is one way. We also have folks that are really using a lot of open data platforms. again, this is another great tool in our toolbox, but it's not necessarily going to be that transparency for all of our community members. So for someone like myself, who is a data person and a consultant, and works with this kind of information all the time, I love looking at Excel spreadsheets and lots of data listed out. But your general public isn't necessarily going to be excited by that, or really even necessarily understand what they're looking at. It's important to remember that our constituents don't necessarily spend all day doing the kinds of things that we do. And we'll talk a bit about that in the communication side. But overall, when we're thinking about transparency, we really do want to create a pathway for our citizens to participate in government, to understand what we're doing, to be able to share their opinions on it. Is this something they want us to be doing? Is this something that they don't want us to be doing? What could we be doing differently? It is an important feedback mechanism. And ultimately, when we're thinking bigger picture, maybe around master planning, or if any of you are involved in any type of sustainability planning, we really are trying to spark enthusiasm around maybe new goals and potentially lead to behavior change. And we're certainly not going to change our behavior by looking at Excel spreadsheets. Another challenge that, or not a challenge, a trend in local government is, of course, public engagement. And this, of course, is something we've been doing all the time. But what the trend here over the last decade, I think, has been very positive in that we are shifting from, okay, we're just, we need to have a public meeting to tick this box because the law requires that we have a public meeting on this particular topic or this plan. Instead, we are really now deeply engaging our constituents through our planning processes. There's a significantly higher focus on equity, making sure that all the voices in the community are heard, and not just the folks that have the luxury of being able to go to a public meeting during the week at night. Not everybody has that opportunity. And so I think there's been a really strong trend, and there's a lot of tools available to effectively engage the community. We've got online tools. We've got new formats for how we're engaging folks. Everything now is about going to where your constituents are. And so being able to have that opportunity where you are, say, attending a neighborhood meeting, working with them, attending groups, working with groups that already engage with some of the maybe more disenfranchised members of your community, working with partners that connect with the homeless, for example, and having an opportunity to understand what their priorities are. So there's been a lot of trends in local government around public engagement, and we're doing a really good job during our planning processes. I would like to see us continue that conversation. I think it's really important. Again, to maintain that level of transparency and accountability, we need to make sure that the engagement, that strong engagement, isn't stopping when our planning processes stop. I know it gets hard when the contract ends and the consultants are gone and the money's gone, but there are ways that we can continue to engage our public beyond the planning process. And then the final trend I want to mention is technology. These tools are coming at us fast and furiously, and they're evolving so quickly. It's very hard to keep up, I think, for many communities. And we never know, what we should focus on. I actually, for folks that are interested, I do a podcast called SAS Talk with Kim, and I did a 2-part series on smart cities with the city of Orlando, Chris Castro down there, who's their director of sustainability. And one of the great points that he made during that podcast is, when we're thinking about smart cities, it's really important not to just be pulled into that shiny object. What is that new shiny object that's coming at us? You really need to make sure that the technologies that you're applying in your community are ones that make sense for your community and aren't just like the new thing that everybody has to have. Because what makes smart cities smart is that it's applicable to your particular situations, and that you're able to have everything connected. Technology is a big way we do that, and technology is a great way that we can connect with our community members, and we can tell stories leveraging technology. But again, it's really important that we're making sure we are using all the tools and technology that make the most sense for your particular community. And it's not necessarily the flashiest and the newest tool out there. So again, all of this really leads to where we want to reach out to our community members so they can be part of what we're doing as a government. And when it comes to planning, and in particularly, we're thinking long-term planning, what do we want our community to look like? What do we want it to be? They have a lot to say around that. And so to get our community members engaged, we need to use storytelling. We hear a lot about storytelling now. It's kind of becoming a big deal, but mostly because it makes sense. And storytelling, as we all know, this is not new. Humans are emotional creatures. In all of our histories from, back from when we were cave people, everything has been passed down through stories. All of our histories, even cave writings, the drawings were all telling stories about the history. So helping people understand. So there actually is, in neuroscience, in neurobiology, there is a trigger in your brain that actually turns on when you are connected to a story. And so you connect to stories when you can relate to a character or a place. And so connecting, if you live in that particular place, it's very easy to connect to that story. And it's really important when we're thinking about behavior change. And this isn't, we need everybody to, stop using fossil fuels immediately. Well, yeah, we do, but that isn't realistic. Behavior change can be very simple things. Next month, May is bike month, and there's bike week. A lot of us are really focused on wanting to have more facilities and bike lanes available in our community so people can bike to work or just get around on their bike. That's a behavior change, shifting from our cars to our bikes, wanting to walk, being able to walk to the store, setting up our community so that we are able to do that. These little behavior changes, they won't happen unless we're really turning on that receptor in our brain, and we can do that through storytelling. So we developed a storytelling framework. It's very basic, and I'm going to walk folks through it. We do have a community dashboard, as Darren mentioned, that has the sections that mimic the storytelling framework so that you can really pull your data together and fit it into a story very easily. And of course, our team helps you through that. So let's start with the very first step. So we talk about setting the stage. It's really important setting the stage when we're thinking about, okay, so let's say you have a new project or a program that you're starting in your community and you want to engage your community members. We set the stage by really giving them information on what this is, really basic things. But it's important that we keep things very simple. We want very simple explanations, and we want to make sure we avoid technical jargon. It's really important to remember because, as I was saying earlier, sometimes we're just too close to a project. You're in this, maybe you've been planning this and working on this for 6 months, you finally got the contract or the go-ahead, and now you're getting it started. Well, your community members haven't necessarily been focusing on it like that. And even though it may not be something that's super technical or difficult to understand, it's just not something they've been doing on a day-to-day basis. And so it's really important that we eliminate any technical jargon we have and keep it very simple for folks. And so it's important to focus on why. Why should our community members care about what we're trying to put out there? And then working to kind of make that emotional connection to them. And so here are some examples of, we're providing information. We like to start with, okay, we want to talk about school energy use in this example. What do we mean by school energy use? Some people might think that's just like electricity. Maybe it's more than that. We want to explain exactly what we mean. We want to do it at a 6th grade level. We also want to give them a sense of, okay, where are we trying to get to? What do our goals look like? And if we're using units, particularly when we get into charts, you're going to want to explain what those are. With energy use, this is a really good example. MMBTU per square foot here, million British thermal units. This is not a term that is very typically used by the general public. Those of us in the energy field use this all the time. And so it's important to explain that, million BTU is actually kind of a common denominator so that you can add up energy from different sources. So electricity, natural gas, oil, you can roll those all together and get an entire building's energy use. It's important that people understand that if you're going to be showing charts. And so the exercise for setting the stage, this is where you can jot it down. So what is it you want to share with your community? Is it a particular program, a project? We can give an example here. Let's see. Is it going to just come? Let's see if I have to do this. Okay, so let's say we're doing a bike lane and wayfinding project. And so how will this particular project impact people in our community? Well, it could improve their public health. It gives them more options for how they can get around the town. It can reduce GHG emissions. And so I'm going to stop myself here and reflect on what we said we need to do. So we need to use simple explanations. Well, bike lanes may make sense, but wayfinding, now that might make sense to all of us as planners, but that is not a term that is typically used in the general public. And so we may want to just say, hey, everybody, the city is going to kick off a program. We'd like to add bike lanes and some signage so that you can get around easily. So thinking about reframing that word. Also, we never want to use acronyms. So I would immediately get rid of this GHG. That needs to be spelled out. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then we want to make sure it's clear why and how that's connected. Well, getting people out of their cars reduces the emissions coming from there, keeps our air health cleaner. There's lots of ways that we can explain this when we break it down. And so for you all, when you're thinking about your particular program, just think about it, write it out as you normally would, and then go back and use this lens and think about, okay, if I don't do this every day, what words might not make sense to me? Or how can I really think about the impact on people? Think about it from, if it's a family, could it be beneficial for jobs in your community? How does it improve neighborhood health, safety, things that people generally care about? And just be sure to get rid of any acronyms that you might have. So that's the first step, super easy. And I do have a guidebook that I can point you all to. You can download it for free that has some resources on how to do all this. Okay, the next step is knowing your audience. This is my favorite one because it's so important. A lot of this fits into any type of branding that folks may have done. I know branding is becoming more and more popular within local governments, but it hasn't traditionally been something we focused on. But you really need to grab and keep people's attention. Images, icons, infographics are a really good way to do that. And there's lots of reasons to do this. One, of course, 14% of US adults are illiterate, and 50% of them can't read a book at an 8th grade level. That's a very sad statistic, but that's the reality. But we also have more and more diverse communities. And so English is not necessarily the first language of all of our community members. So we really want to make sure that we're reflecting things in a way with imagery that people can connect with. And additionally, you only have a limited time to engage your audience. Studies show that when someone goes to a website, they give you 3 to 5 seconds before they will move around. So that's it. 3 to 5 seconds is not a lot of time, and you're not going to capture someone's attention with like 2 paragraphs of text. So having fun images that people can connect with and understand are a good way to grab that attention. And of course, our brain actually processes visuals 60,000 times faster than we process text. So that's a really good reason as well to do that. Here's an example of, looking at Energy Star buildings by type. And this text is just dummy text, but this is a bubble graph. This is one of the data visualization tools we have in our dashboard. So we're looking at Energy Star buildings by type. Well, here's a store, retail, hospital, office, hotel. We could easily have shown this in a bar graph, but this is way more interesting to look at, right? So it connects folks in that way. So for this practice exercise, think about whatever program that you identify, what kind of imagery could you use to explain what you're doing? If what is who's the primary audience? Is it everybody? What are the things they care about? I'm going to do a quick example here. I want to show folks, because there's a lot of free tools to do this. People say, well, I would love to do infographics, but I'm not a designer. So there's a site called canva.com, and all I've done here is log into my profile. You log in, it's free to sign up. And simply, if I want to create an infographic, you can see I've created some in the past on waste and climate change, but let's just say I want to create an infographic on this bike lane and wayfinding program that we're doing. So here's all of these layouts. These all layouts are free. These are already made for you. So I'm just going to scroll through. Let's see, is there something on bikes? Recycling, daily schedule, pets, bike safety. Great. I'm going to click that. I can start with this. I don't have to make this all mine. Let's say, okay, well, this is good. Bike safety. We definitely want to talk about that in what we're doing. But let's say, these aren't our colors. Our town colors are, blue. So we want to see blue. And maybe we want, we want to see the text as white. Maybe that works better with our colors. You can change this stuff out super easy. Let's say you also, like, this is great bike safety, but we want to add information of our own specific things. We add a new page. It stays the blue if we want it to. Let's say I want to add an image of a bike. I just type in bike at the top, hit enter. I'm just going to grab this first one. Boom, bike. Okay. Now we want, let's see, maybe we want to add in a shape, provide some information in here, add some text. Bring it over. This text is in white, so I can't see it, so I just have to change that color. Make this bigger, and maybe I want to let people know that come join us for a bike safety training. On May 12th or whatever, right? You can use whatever font you want. This doesn't have to stay this way if we want something more appropriate. Okay, we've just added that. Maybe we want to add, another element, an illustration, or an icon. They have all kinds of options here. Or if there's a chart, maybe we want to show them something around our bike, number of people riding bikes today. You simply put this in here and you click on it. And here you can add the values. So we'll say, this was in 2000, we had 10 people riding bikes. Oops. In 2004, we had, 200, whatever, you get the sense. So super easy to do this. You can save it. You can change out all of this text as well if you want to say something differently. And you can save it. You can order prints. You can make it public online, download it, and it's yours. Super easy to do that. So I want to make sure, and again, our resources, that's canva.com for that, but we've got some additional ones in the resource guide for you to check out. Okay, moving back to the presentation. So thinking about that, again, imagery, if you can use icons, there's also online free places you can go online to get icons. There's some you can pay for. Sometimes they're like $2. So there's a lot of ways that you can add some flair to your your materials or your website for no additional costs. And I think it's really important just to add quickly here, thinking about who your audience is. So let's say for this the bike lanes and the wayfinding, we are really only hitting like 2 neighborhoods. Now, we still would be interested in getting everybody engaged in, understanding what we're doing, but we're maybe focused on those particular neighborhoods. So we might want to look at the demographics of those neighborhoods. Maybe it's a lot of families, so we want to kind of think about, kids on bikes and what that might look like. Or it's maybe a lot of people in this neighborhood are younger professionals. Some of the millennials that, hey, they love the idea of not owning a car. So maybe that's our messages around that. Hey, this can be an alternative to your car because we're adding these bike lanes and we're connecting you to the employment centers, thinking about it from that perspective. It's a lot of ways that you can do that. And this really doesn't have to be that hard if you just keep asking yourself these questions. I actually, I was with one of my clients the other day, and he told me that he was so excited about the guidebook. He printed it out and he keeps it at his desk and uses it all the time, which was just so great to hear because we meant for this to be something that was super user friendly. Okay, so moving on. Another really important piece to kind of build out your story is providing some context in comparison. This is really important. It is one thing to say, okay, like in this example here, we could say Nashua, for example, has 17 lead buildings. Well, that's awesome, I think, right? If I'm the general public, how do I know what everybody else has? Is 17 good or bad? Are we way behind? Are we doing well? We don't know. We didn't provide any particular context for people to get their head around. So it's okay to provide like one data point. It's something, but it would be good if we were to be able to say, okay, well, it's 17%, but that's up from, 17 buildings, and that's up from 10 buildings just 2 years ago. Okay, now I've provided a little bit of self-comparison so I can see that the city is improving. But it's much better. It's great if we can actually show our data plus our existing data and then provide some context. So here we've provided context in this particular bar graph where we can see, okay, this is in New Hampshire, for example. Nashua has 17, but Concord has more. But we're still second in the state. So that's good. It gives us maybe some motivation to try to see if we can beat out Concord. And then we provide additional context here. There's 212 buildings in 49 different New Hampshire communities. So 212 total, we've got 17 of those. Again, it's giving us some context. Sometimes our context isn't going to make us look that good. That's okay. Being transparent means being honest in sharing information, even when it's not necessarily providing, showing us in the best light. It just means, hey, we've got work to do here. And as long as the local government acknowledges that, 9 times out of 10, your community is going to be like, okay, well, they've told us what's going on. They told us how they're going to try to improve this. That's what they want to hear. Yes, of course, there'll always be a few naysayers in the group. But for the most part, your community is going to appreciate having the information and having some context and comparison so they can really get an understanding of how you're doing on that particular metric. Here's some other ways to show data, and here's the example I was talking about. Good. So the bonus, if you get to the bonus, in this case, we're talking about recycling rate. So we're saying our recycling rate this year is 42%. That's up from 27% 3 years ago, and that's ahead of the national average of 34%. This made it a bonus because we added in, but we're working towards our goal of 50% by 2020, right? So we're giving that additional information of that kind of a progress report. The more information you can provide, the better. Helps people understand and get excited about it. So for your practice exercise here, there's a bunch of questions and really just thinking about, okay, so again, back to the bike lanes and wayfinding, what are some of the metrics that could help us tell that story? Obviously miles of bike lanes would be helpful, maybe number and location of bike racks, and other facilities, bike trainings available, and then understanding like, okay, it's great if we have that data, but does anybody else collect that data that we could do some kind of comparison with? And of course we have like Bike Score, for example, that folks can look at. And there's also other places that folks can look for this data. State, federal agencies collect a lot of different data. Regional planning agencies collect data. The STAR community program is also a good one if you are not familiar with that, starcommunities.org. STAR basically is a framework, a rating system for what it means to be a sustainable community. And I was involved in the very early days, and just actually wrapped up my time as a technical advisory group member. But the idea was, back in the day, there were all these rating systems coming out, like from magazines, saying, oh, this is the greenest city in America. It's like based on, this particular criteria, but you have to really dig deep to see what that criteria is. And so this was a way to be really transparent about, okay, this is, and hundreds of local government folks and experts from around the country helped develop this and identified very specific goal areas. So all that information is online. They have profiles of all their communities and how they've done on the different metrics. So that could be a resource for folks as well. And again, that's just available online for free. And so our last piece, now we've done all this work. We've set the stage. We told them, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what it is. This is why you should care about this. Here's, some explanation of it in using icons, infographics, maybe some cool charts. Here's some context for that data. So now we've grabbed their attention. It's really important that we give them something to do. Maybe you got them excited about your program. Don't leave them hanging. Don't go out and say, hey, we're doing all this great stuff, and bring them into a site or to your event and then not give them something that they can do to be part of the solution. The community, if they're looking and paying attention, they're wanting to get engaged. So don't miss out on that opportunity. And of course, if we're using a storytelling framework, stories can be so empowering. So use that connection to spark that action. Here's an example, again, from our dashboard. In this case, this one is back to the school energy use. We've got little icons that give very simple things that they can do to reduce energy use in the schools, and how that can be something that's beneficial to all of them. And so for this practice exercise, these calls to action really are so important, but start small. Think about it. I like to think about the storytelling, particularly with data. So, I showed you the open data platform at the very beginning of this session, and that serves a valuable purpose. What this storytelling framework does is and our dashboard does it, the framework, I like to see it as kind of, it's opening doors to get to that raw data. That open data platform is giving raw data. Not a lot of people are going to understand that. When we add this storytelling framework in front of that, it creates a series of doors that community members can choose to go through to get further and further down the line. And there may be some members of your community that want to get all the way to the raw data. You should let them do that. Let them connect to that. But the majority of them aren't necessarily going to want to get to that point. So give them that information that they need along the way. And so think about, what are the small actions that people can take? So back to the bike example, small things that people can take. Hey, this week, I forget the actual week, but I know it's in May, Bike Week, one day. Is there one day that week that your kids could ride their bikes to school with you or whatever, or that you could ride your bike to work? So that, that's a small action. People like riding their bikes. It's spring. Usually it's nicer than this today is. That's a very small thing that people can do. If we're thinking about other things, like wanting to get people out to the parks, hey, go have a picnic at the park. Reducing energy use, right? It's turn off one thing. Make sure you're turning off one thing every day. Very little actions. With recycling, it's, make sure you're recycling all your cans, your aluminum cans and your newspapers, little things like that. And then build up to those bigger actions, right? Like, so that once a year commute on a bike to school or work, maybe that becomes once a month. Maybe that becomes, once a week for some people. Get them to kind of build up to the bigger actions. Maybe that ends up transitioning, like, hey, we're downsizing to one car in our family because we're going to use our bikes more, because now the community, the city has provided us more resources to make it very easy for us to ride our bikes safely to where we want to get to. And also think about, what are the programs that are available? So, if we stick with the bike example, maybe there's a bike share program in your community or one that's coming. Maybe there's a community group or Department of Public Works has bike safety training classes. Maybe they give away free bike helmets. Connect people to existing programs so that they can understand how they can very easily do something. It's one thing to say, hey, take this action. It's a whole other thing to say, we would like you to take this action, and here's how you can do it in our community super easy. So just adding in those pieces gets you to that place, and that kind of completes that story where you've gotten them excited, and then you've pulled them and actually guided them to go and do it themselves and really be part of that bigger solution of what your community is trying to accomplish. And then you get your results. You know, you are being transparent, you're holding yourself accountable, you're sharing with your community, engaging them effectively in a way that they're interested in, and you're triggering that brain to pay attention and to maybe make those changes in their behavior, which could potentially lead to them influencing others to do it. And so you really can get some good results by following that framework. I listed out these goals here. This actually came from one of my clients, but I loved this approach when we're thinking about where you're taking things to the next level. So you're putting out this data. First, maybe it's to educate. Maybe it's to set goals. One of my clients, they started doing the storytelling, but they didn't have goals for most of the metrics. And so they wanted to start putting out the information, and they're asking the community, what do you think our goals should be? You know, how do we get to a goal? Let's figure this out together. And then it really comes into aligning city programming. Like, okay, if we're going to follow this, particularly if you go to a full brand for something, how can we align other activities or programs in the city to fit this so that we give people that easy pathway? And then really maintaining that engagement. So one of the things we talked about at the beginning around how we're doing such a great job effectively engaging people during the planning process, how are we maintaining that engagement beyond that? And I know it's not easy, but if we can work in using some basic and even free resources here to keep that storytelling going, to be tracking your progress, let your community know, hey, you identified these as priorities in that planning process. Here's where we're at getting that moving forward, and here's where we need your help. And so getting them excited, but again, we have to use this framework of storytelling, using the infographics, the icons, really communicating at a 6th grade level so that we're not alienating anybody, but instead inviting everybody to be part of it. This is just an example of, you know, again, this isn't easy. We have like a data collection template for our clients. You can just use a spreadsheet. You know, okay, here are some of the focus areas or categories. Maybe you pull them right from your comprehensive plan or, you know, a neighborhood plan, quality of life plan, community health impact assessment, whatever. Start pulling stuff from there and say, here are some of those metrics that we're tracking. Here's the data we have. Here's who's responsible for it. It just starts building that out. That's an easy thing that you can do today. And it doesn't have to be a lot. You know, you can start with a few metrics. So we've been working in quite a few communities doing this storytelling and applying the dashboard. And some of the things that we're learning from this is people really aren't aware of the data. You know, one of our clients came to us very specifically because it was a community development department. And the director came to me and said, I am just so tired of being at public meetings and having community members say, the city needs to do this or the city needs to do that. And she's like, we are doing that. How do you not know that we're doing these things? And so it really started as just trying to get the community to understand what the city was already doing. And we started with just a basic conversation, like, okay, tell me the projects that you're most proud of. You know, and we started working from that lens very simply. They didn't have a planning process that they were in. Their master plan was fairly outdated. They know they need to update it, but that wasn't going to be in the budget for a while. So we just started picking out projects and actions that they had been taking and looking for the data points on that and turning that into the story. We're finding that people really do want this information. They didn't know to ask for it, but once they see it, they're very interested in it. We're also finding that people are of course, if you're doing something with this case, it was with our dashboard, everything's online. They're viewing it on mobile devices most likely. So if you do build a website or have anything that's online, you need to make sure that it is getting designed for mobile first. It is a it's a different framing and design that developers have to do to get something to look really fresh on mobile. Keep the information fresh. This is where you can get super creative. So let's say you have 12 data points that you want to talk about. That's great. And you're not going to be able to update again for 6 months. That's okay, because if you put 12 data points, on a website or out on materials, the community is not going to necessarily read all of them, right? So set it up so that you can swap out what's the first 3 that are listed, because that's as far as they're going to go. You're not going to have, maybe a few people here and there are going to read through every detail, but the majority of your constituents don't have that kind of time, and so eye is going to be captured by whatever you want them to be catching. So you put at the very top and you highlight and you use the good graphics for the top 3, and that's what they'll look at. And then a month later, you switch it out so that there's different ones on the top. That keeps the site fresh, but you're not even adding in new information. It's a real simple thing to do. And what we're finding as well is that once we get a few one department's data up onto one of our dashboards, and it starts getting traction, I mean, the other departments just want in. That we're seeing that a lot with our clients, where we start with one department and then everybody just wants to get their stuff up on there. So it's a great way to kind of build out a broader community dashboard. And so there's my information. Feel free to email me. We will, I did want to mention, we are, and thanks to Darren and the Berkeley Group for hosting this, we are partnering with Darren and the Berkeley Group in Virginia. So if any of you work with them now or are looking to, you can access our resources and the KLA community dashboard through the Berkeley Group. So you can reach out to them, certainly can reach out to us as well, but they're our partners in Virginia. And we'll also be, along with the Berkeley Group, at the APA National Conference in New Orleans later this week and next. KLA actually will have a kiosk in the tech zone. We're right across from the POSTA area, so I hope anyone who will be there will come and visit us. Yeah, so that's what I have for presentation, and we should have about 10 minutes, I think, for question and answer, Sarah.
Thanks, Kim. I think it's so important to lay out a roadmap for how to tell your story. We hear in planning so much about storytelling and all the other buzzwords that come along, and to be able to kind of have a step-by-step process, I think is fascinating. And we are very proud to have an affiliation with you for Virginia, and look forward to seeing you in New Orleans. Sarah, do we have any questions queued up? I know I've got at least one, but I want to give others an opportunity.
Sure. So I have a question I can go ahead and start off with. Kim, how long does it take to get a logo through the online logo tournament?
Yeah, oh yeah, so and I'll go back to those slides. So a couple of if you're doing a full brand for your program and you want a new logo beyond like your city seal, these 2 examples here, this is Concord, Nashua, these were completed through logotournament.com. I've been using them for years. It is so easy, because a lot of folks, if any of you have tried to create a logo for yourselves, maybe there's a crafty intern or a friend that does it on the side, or you try to hire somebody. When you do that, you're really only getting one person's lens and perspective, and you can give as much guidance as you want, but that's always a challenge. So logotournament.com, and there's other ones too. I just tend to use Logo Tournament. That puts your project out to hundreds of designers across the world. And so in 10 days, you can actually get a brand new design and it's, you provide the guidance. You have to keep it updated, providing kind of regular feedback each day. But it's it's a couple $100 versus what might often be a few thousand. So I can tell you, like this one for Concord, I believe we paid $600, and we had, I want to say, 250 entries to choose from. So it's a pretty great way. And like I said, it was 10 days. You can get a new logo really fast and high quality, and get a lot of options. So I recommend that tool, and it's a fraction of what you would pay if you hired a local designer to do something.
Thank you, Kim. Darren, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, Kim, your grasp of the 21st century technology tools always amazes me, but this is more of a basic 20th century kind of a thing. Yeah, I've always heard that newspapers were written to the 8th grade level. I've always, in my writing, tried to do comprehensive plans and even zoning ordinances so that they were very easy to read for the layman. But your statistic really is kind of shocking that half the population doesn't even read at an 8th grade level. How in the world do you write to a 6th grade level?
Yeah, I can tell you, when I started doing this, I thought I was doing it, and I wasn't. And again, we have our lens, and we try to break things down and make them as simple as possible. It's not easy. I recommend folks start with, if you go to like the EPA or the Department of Energy, they both have sites for students, for kids. Go there first. Those are, or any site that is looking at kind of more complicated information and trying to explain it to children. That is a really good place to go. Honestly, though, I also leverage, my neighbor is a 5th grade teacher. I have her read my stuff and give me feedback on words that may not make sense for anybody, at the 6th grade level. So leverage those kinds of resources there. But I would definitely start with some of the online sites. And let's see, maybe I can even pull one up while we're here. I think if you just Google EPA kids. Okay, here, the first thing, learning and teaching about the environment, Student's Guide to Global Climate Change. So look here and see how they're talking about, climate change is not an easy topic, right? So look at the words that they're using. I think that's really important. It's a great place to start. Thinking about less rain can mean less water. Those are very simple words, right? So these are good places to start to give folks a sense of what it means to write at a 6th grade level.
It's always amazing to me how you don't use the tools that are most accessible to you. I'm sitting here thinking, I just asked you that question and my son is in the 6th grade.
Exactly. Exactly. Use your kids if they're at that level. And, my daughter's 7, so she's getting close. I'll start asking her, hey, come work for me part-time.
Exactly. Sarah, anybody else submit any questions?
We don't have any questions yet. Any other questions? So if anyone has one, go ahead and send it in. Let's see. Kim, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or any kind of closing notes or
anecdotes? I'd like for you to talk about the process for building a brand and the loaded question of whether people should hire a consultant in order to do that or not.
Yeah, building a brand is tough. You can spend, and one of the things that's interesting, so let me show my presentation again. My business went through a branding process last year, and it was really interesting because I felt like it was an important thing to do. I didn't really have a ton of money to spend, but I did hire a branding consultant, and I went through the process. And as I was going through the process, I kept thinking, having been a local government staff person myself, I kept thinking, like, how could my clients leverage this? Because most of you are not going to have that opportunity to go through a branding exercise. And so how could I take what I was learning and applying to my business and create a framework that local governments could use in just thinking about it? And I think there's like 3 key things when we're thinking about branding. And I've kind of broken it down into a couple of key questions for folks. And I just want to pull it up because I just updated it recently. Because when you think about branding, first off, a lot of people don't understand what branding is. They think that branding is the logo, and branding is not a logo. Your brand is essentially the feeling that people get when they experience your brand. So if they are coming to an event of yours, what is that feeling? What should they be connecting with from a brand standpoint? So when you think about like Nike, it's like, just do it, right? Their brand is about action and just moving forward. That's what they want people to feel when they buy their products. So I kind of whittled it down to these 3 little questions, which, this isn't a full brand, but this at least gets you to a place of moving things forward. So starting with, what is that feeling that people should have when they engage with your program? What is the vision for it? What are you really wanting your community to look like when this program or project is done? Or how does it influence the community? In this case, this was for Concord. We were talking about sustainability and climate change. So how do we define that? Maybe you're talking about something else. How do you define that? It's really important. Again, we need to work on getting rid of that technical jargon. And for many community members, sustainability isn't a word they connect with, or they have a negative reaction to in some cases. So what do we mean by sustainability? Well, let's break that out. We mean that we want a thriving economy, a healthy environment, and happy neighborhoods. Okay, that I understand. That makes sense. And so thinking about it from that perspective, this is a very basic, it doesn't get more basic than this, but it's a good starting point for folks when they're thinking about their brand. And when you answer each of these questions, then that is what goes into the logo tournament, for example. You would provide the information from this in there so that you have something to go on. Then you build your colors off of that. And you can build like, a whole color palette. There's online tools for building color palettes free. Say, well, we just have 2 colors, but I want to have more in my materials. Okay, then Google color palette generator. The first thing that pops up is a free site where you can put in either the hex codes or the RGB numbers for those 2 primary colors you have, and it'll give you tons of options to build out a bigger color palette to use. So there's lots of ways you can do it, but you really have to answer at a minimum these 3 questions. What's the feeling people should have? What's the vision, and how do you define it? Answer those. That starts building out what your brand is, and then you can work on how you're illustrating that brand to folks.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, Sarah, anything else?
That is all that I have. I want to say thank you to Kim for presenting today, and thank you, Darren, for hosting this webinar for us on this beautiful Monday. And thank you, all the attendees, for joining us. Again, be on the lookout for a follow-up email from APA Virginia. Don't forget to log your CM credit, and we hope to see some of you next week at National Planning Conference.
Thank you all so much.
Y'all have a great week. See you in New Orleans.